Israel just pulled the trigger on the secret plan it had been keeping in the drawer for decades. Leaked documents reveal the shocking truth. This was never about security. Gaza is now the stage of something unbelievable. And while you're watching this video, the map of the Middle East is being rewritten for good. Today you're going to find out how Israel is fulfilling exactly the promise it made years ago, and why this could be the very last moment in Palestinian history. In September 2025, Israel drastically ramped up its operations in Gaza City, the largest urban center in the Gaza Strip. But this time, the strategy is fundamentally different from anything we've ever seen before. The Israeli forces aren't just hitting specific military targets. They're systematically destroying the infrastructure that makes it possible for civilian life to go on in the region. Hospitals, oxygen therapy centers, residential buildings, humanitarian aid offices, everything is being methodically wiped out. The result was immediate and devastating. In less than 15 days, over 450,000 Palestinians, nearly half the population of Gaza City, were forced to flee to the south of the Strip. It's the biggest population exodus in an area already known as one of the most densely populated places on Earth. But here's the crucial detail international media is starting to catch on to. There's no set timeline for when these people will be allowed to return. The Israeli evacuation orders don't say when it will be safe to go back. And with every passing day, more buildings are demolished, more infrastructure is destroyed, creating an irreversible reality on the ground. Last Tuesday, something happened that shocked even the most seasoned observers of the conflict. Israel directly targeted the oxygen station at Al-Quds Hospital in Gaza City, taking completely out of service one of the last functional medical centers in the region. Let's break down what that actually means. A hospital oxygen station isn't just another piece of medical gear. It's literally what keeps hundreds of critical patients alive. People in ICUs, premature babies in incubators, patients in emergency surgery, all depend on that system to survive. The strike was so precise it hit specifically the oxygen therapy center, rendering the equipment totally useless. Doctors reported they had to evacuate dozens of critical patients under desperate conditions, many of whom didn't survive the improvised transport to already overwhelmed hospitals. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, an Australian volunteer doctor working at Al-Shifa Hospital, described the situation as a bloodbath. She said she's lost count of the number of amputations she's had to perform since the start of this new offensive. We no longer have the capacity to treat complex injuries. We're just trying to keep people alive until we can transfer them somewhere with proper structure, she said. 3 days later, another targeted attack grabbed international attention. Israel bombed the main office of one of the biggest humanitarian aid organizations operating in Gaza, wiping out its entire ability to distribute food and medicine to the civilian population. The timing wasn't random. The strike came exactly 24 hours after the organization had announced a new food distribution program for families being forced to evacuate Gaza City. The building was completely destroyed, along with tons of medical and food supplies that had been stored for distribution. Witnesses said the bombing was so intense it left a crater more than 10 meters wide where the distribution center once stood. The entire logistical system that allowed international aid to reach Palestinian families was wiped out in just a matter of hours. The numbers of displaced people are staggering, but behind every statistic is a family being forced to make the hardest decision of their lives. Between September 10th and 25th, more than 450,000 people abandoned their homes in Gaza City. Satellite images show human lines stretching for kilometers, winding down the few roads that connect the north to the south of Gaza. Entire families are walking under the burning sun, often for more than 8 hours, carrying little kids and elderly relatives who can barely move. But here's the most disturbing part. Many of these people had already been displaced multiple times since October 2023. Ahmed Al-Mansouri, a 34-year-old teacher, told reporters this was the 5th time his family had been forced to evacuate. First, we left from the north. Second time from the center. Third, from the east. Fourth, from the west. Now, we don't even know where to go anymore, he said, carrying his 3-year-old daughter in his arms. In the middle of all this, Israel set up what it calls humanitarian zones in the south of Gaza, supposedly safe areas where evacuated civilians can take shelter. But the reality of these zones is far from humanitarian. These so-called safe zones are really just makeshift camps in the sand, without basic infrastructure, without enough drinking water, without proper sanitation systems. Families who spent their whole lives in their own homes are now sleeping in tarp tents, sharing portable toilets with hundreds of other people. Dr. James Rodriguez, coordinator for Doctors Without Borders in the region, reported that sanitary conditions in humanitarian zones are catastrophic. Cases of child diarrhea shot up 340% in 2 weeks, while skin diseases spread quickly due to the lack of clean water for basic hygiene. Even more worrying is that these humanitarian zones aren't really safe either. Since they were set up, at least 12 Israeli strikes have hit near these camps, killing 67 civilians who thought they were protected. Now we get to the question no one wants to say out loud, but everyone in international analysis is thinking. Is there really an intention to let these 450,000 people ever go back to Gaza City? Documented evidence suggests not. Leaks from Israeli cabinet meetings, obtained by international newspapers, reveal discussions about historic opportunities for territorial reconfiguration and permanent solutions to Gaza's demographic issue. Reserve General Yitzhak Segev, a former military commander in the region, said in a recent interview that it would be a strategic mistake to allow the population to return to areas that were cleared with such military sacrifice. That wording, especially the use of the term cleared, caught the attention of international law experts. Documents obtained by human rights groups reveal a detailed plan to create security corridors that would effectively divide Gaza into isolated sectors. These corridors, up to 2 kilometers wide, would be permanent military zones controlled by Israel. If fully implemented, this plan would make it impossible for the displaced population to return to their original homes, since many residential areas would fall within those military corridors. In practice, it would mean a de facto annexation of large portions of Gaza territory. International lawyer Michael Chun, a specialist in territorial law, explained, when you remove a civilian population from its historic territory and then establish permanent military control over that area, that constitutes, by legal definition, territorial annexation, even if it's not formally declared. This is the context in which we should understand why several countries rushed to officially recognize the State of Palestine in recent weeks. France, the UK, Canada, and Australia simultaneously announced recognition of Palestine as a sovereign state during the UN General Assembly. That coordination wasn't a coincidence. European diplomats, speaking off the record, revealed there's a growing perception that the window for a two-state solution is closing fast, maybe irreversibly. The French Prime Minister declared, "We cannot stand idly by while we witness the systematic elimination of the possibility of a viable Palestinian state." The choice of words was deliberate. Systematic elimination is technical language in international law used to describe policies that aim to make a people's self-determination impossible. Israel's reaction was immediate and harsh. Prime Minister Netanyahu declared that a Palestinian state will never be established and announced he was recalling Israeli ambassadors from the countries that recognize Palestine for urgent consultations. More significant was the announcement that Israel would expand its military operations until every terrorist threat is eliminated from Gaza, a wording analysts interpreted as a signal the current operations would continue indefinitely. While politicians and diplomats debate issues of state and territory, the human reality in Gaza is deteriorating by the hour. The health system collapsed completely after the strikes on oxygen centers and main hospitals. Dr. Fatima Al-Zahra, head of emergency at Al-Shifa Hospital, described the current situation. "We can no longer even prioritize who to save first. We've got kids dying of dehydration next to adults wounded by explosives. There's no structure to treat anyone properly. The food situation is just as desperate. With the destruction of humanitarian distribution centers, families are going up to 4 days without proper meals. Cases of acute child malnutrition shot up 280% in just 3 weeks. A UN report, leaked to international press, classified the current situation as artificially induced famine on a population scale. The document uses technical language that, historically, has only been applied to genocides recognized by the international community. Maybe the most devastating numbers are those involving children. Out of the 450,000 Palestinians forced to evacuate, around 180,000 are under 16 years old. Kids who have already spent their whole lives under blockade now face the added trauma of losing their homes, schools, and communities. Psychologists working in the region report that 85% of the children show signs of severe psychological trauma. Issues like selective mutism, behavioral regression, and panic episodes have become epidemic among evacuated minors. Layla, 7 years old, told a social worker, "Mama said we'll go back home when things get better, but I heard the adults saying our house doesn't exist anymore." Stories like this repeat across all the evacuee camps. On top of that, satellite image analysis reveals a systematic pattern in the destruction across Gaza. These aren't random or tactical strikes. There's a clear territorial logic behind the choice of targets. Geospatial analysts identified that the strikes focus on three specific categories: infrastructure that allows civilian presence, hospitals, distribution centers, power grids, buildings that could serve as community hubs, schools, mosques, cultural centers, and structures that enable internal movement, bridges, key crossroads. The result is a territory that becomes progressively unlivable for a dense civilian population, but remains useful for military control. Dr. Rachel Morrison, an urban planning specialist from Harvard, described the pattern as systematic deurbanization. Sadly, this pattern isn't new in modern history. Similar situations happened in the Balkans in the 1990s, in the Caucasus in the 2000s, and in other regions where territorial disputes were resolved through forced demographic changes. In all those cases, the process followed similar stages. First, military operations forcing temporary civilian evacuation. Second, systematic destruction of infrastructure that would allow return. Third, establishment of permanent military control. Fourth, installation of new populations or expansion of territorial control. Gaza seems to be currently transitioning between the second and third stages of that process. Strikes on key points of the city, including an aid office and an oxygen station, have worsened the crisis, driving mass evacuation and sparking a real debate over whether this could pave the way for territorial changes. But formal annexation is still a scenario full of obstacles. What we've seen so far is human pain, displacement, and a race for political narrative. If you want to dig deeper, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and I'll see you at the next Frontline.